Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to start off just first of all by saying welcome to everybody to today's webinar on life story work. I'm delighted to see so many people here today, and I'm looking forward to the shared learning that we can expect over the duration of the day. I'd like to say a particular thank you to our members who are joining us, and thank you for your support. But I also wanted to acknowledge that we have a number of non-members here today. And so what I thought I would do is just take a moment to introduce IFCO. And before I do that, can I just ask that throughout the webinar itself, we're going to ask that everybody remains on mute. And again, that's predominantly about being able to keep some of that background noise to a minimum. If you're having any issues, then Jean-Anne Kennedy is our operations manager. And so you could send her a message if you're having any particular issues at all. If we get to the stage where we're having an opportunity for questions throughout today's webinar, please feel free to put those into the chat function. And again, Jean-Anne will support me to try and make sure that we pick up on as many of those as we can. And obviously we will take some time throughout the duration of the session to ensure that there is a space for that chat and everything that comes from that. I've mentioned already that we're going to be undertaking a recording, and again, this is just about being able to utilise this as part of our learning programme. If I could just introduce you to IFCO, which is on this next slide, Jean-Anne. Thank you. For those of you that are not aware, then IFCO is we're a global, not-for-profit networking organisation. We're serving to promote and support family-based foster care across the world, and they have a 40-year legacy of making a difference in civil society. Really, fascinating to see so much influence that IFCO has had in different ways across that period of time, and as you'll appreciate, something that we will want to and continue to embrace as we go forward. Our organisation, it comprises a multicultural collaboration of foster carers, kinship carers. You can see from my slide, we're talking about former carers, social workers, parents whose children are in foster care, care leavers, academics and professionals, researchers, media and policy makers. And fundamentally, we are an organisation that believes that the importance of amplifying the voice of youth, and we undertake that in many different ways. The fact that we're an international organisation is reflected in not just our panel and of our board members, but actually of those of you that are joining us today. Just to give you a flavour, we have people joining from the UK, Japan, Malta, Egypt, Australia, the United States, Bangladesh, Ireland, Bulgaria, Germany, Netherlands, Portugal, Canada, India, the Philippines, New Zealand, Estonia, Ukraine, Finland, and Sri Lanka. So we have a breadth of knowledge and experience and cultures all coming together around today's webinar. And although we've asked people to remain on mute, please feel free to put in the chat who you are and what country you've come from, if you would want to be able to share that with other participants. I know we would be keen to have that from you. If we just move on to the next slide, I wanted to be able to make the connection for today's webinar. I don't need to go through all of this, but it was really just about giving you the sense of who IFCO are and about our vision. And it is about having a belief that if they so wish, that all children in alternative care across the world should live in family-based care. Because we believe this form of care offers children the best opportunity to grow and prosper. And so we can see that we believe that alternative care should be child-centred and family-focused, that in all decisions the needs and rights of the child should be taken into consideration. They should have a say in all decisions made about their lives, and that fostering kinship care be an inclusive effort by all. And it's in this context and this passionate belief system that underpins our learning events. And therefore, that is one of the reasons why today we wanted to talk about the topic of life story work, and particularly in the context of COVID-19. And so it's therefore now that I would like to be able to turn our attention to today's webinar. So in the next slide, you will see that we've just got a bit of format for the day. We will start off by asking our panel to introduce themselves in a second. We have some questions that you have already submitted, some of you, and therefore we will put some of those questions, I will put those questions to the panel. As I say, if there are any questions that get submitted in the chat function within Zoom, then we'll certainly look to see if we can accommodate those as well. Look to take a bit and talk a little bit about our feedback process and then close the webinar. And I think I've been clear, but I would certainly just like to just reiterate just some of our webinar etiquette. If we could remain muted, please do not take photographs because prior consent would be required. We will be recording this session, as I've said. And also we would invite you to share resource links in the chat function if there is anything that you have to hand that you think is helpful to be able to share. Our real focus today is about just taking what people know, their experience, their, the context in which they've had that experience, and ultimately about this being a learning event and being able to share best practice and ideas across that platform. Okay, so just before I ask the panel to introduce themselves, I've already indicated Jean Ann from IFCO as our operations manager and technical support. I'll do a quick introduction. My name is Jo Derrick. I am the Vice President for IFCO, and I'm delighted, she says slightly nervously, I'm delighted to be hosting and chairing today's webinar. My own experience leading up to joining IFCO has been about 18 years now within the fostering sector. Most of that has been Scotland, some aspects of that have been UK, and I've been about 10 years as a foster carer, and as I say, within the fostering service sector, and now the Chief Executive of Throughcare and Aftercare Forum in Scotland. So I am delighted to be able to take part in asking these questions to our panel, who I'm now going to turn our attention to today. So, Bep, could I ask you first of all, please, just to do an introduction and just a little bit about your own experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting to be back in IFCO. I once was the executive manager of IFCO for several years, but since 2008, I work as an independent consultant, working internationally to help develop systems in deinstitutionalization, development of foster care, etc. But I started my history in foster care as a social worker and a legal guardian of children that lived with foster parents and a teacher of social workers. And I became a foster parent myself. I did that with my family for 25 years. We provided emergency care, which means that children came to us on a Sunday morning, Saturday night, whatever. And they stayed with us for some period of time until a final solution was found or until they could return home. And during that time, I discovered the importance of writing down their life story. We always made a book for these children about the period that they were with us. Then we discovered that they had no idea why they were placed. They had no idea what happened before. And yeah, what I see happen now is that some children, you can see from my hair that I'm a grandmother now, but I also am a foster grandmother. So sometimes suddenly out of the blue, children are on our doorstep and they come to map their lives. And some tell us that they moved 20 times and they have no clue anymore who they are. So they are really wanting to know their identity. Who am I? How do you as a family fit in my history, etc. And that, I think, motivates me to develop tools for social workers to really talk with children about their life history. And well, that's why I was invited to this panel.
Thank you, Bep. And Catherine, same question to yourself, please. Could you introduce yourself and a bit of your experience? Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Catherine Paynter and I live in Ontario, Canada. I've been a social worker for well over 20 years. Started my journey working with children actually in young offenders, working with them, and then moved forward to, I was actually a foster parent as well for about 5.5 years. And I'm an adoptive parent, so I have 3 beautiful daughters and one of whom is adopted. This work has been the core of what I've done for most of my career. 15 years I spent in foster care and adoption work, and really came to understand, like Bep said, that many children that I cared for as I fostered, and many of the children that I worked with moving on to adoption, didn't have an understanding of why they were in care, often didn't understand the reasons why they landed in that place. And life story work with them really helped them through that journey, especially when they're moving on to adoption. It's hard to move forward when you don't have an integrated sense of your past. So I have really spent a lot of time working with children. Over the last 5 years, I've worked with Key Assets, which is a not-for-profit fostering organization and partners with the Martin James Foundation, which also, similar to IFCO, very much is about promoting family-based foster care worldwide. And recently I had the wonderful opportunity of going to Bogota, Colombia in November and working with an agency there to help them strengthen their foster care system. And part of that work has been helping them understand the importance of life story work for children. So I'm really pleased to join you today and share any of my experience and knowledge that I've gained over the years, personal and professional.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you both for your introductions and also for sharing your own personal experiences there as well as your professional experiences. I'm interested because we talk about life story work, but as I say, we are an international organisation with members who will have perhaps different ideas and different concepts. So I wondered if we could start first of all with Bep. When we say, how would you define life story work? What does life story work mean to you as an international consultant who's been involved in this for a number of years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's an international thing. All over, and that is what is now reflected also in the panel. And I think it's also a worldwide problem. I was a member of the working group Voice of the Child in UPFOL, the European Network for Foster Care. And well, we discussed a lot about this life story work, but if I would define it, it is that you provide children and youth to map out their own life history for 3 key reasons. The first is to understand their current situation. I understand why I am where I am. And the second, in my opinion, is what we call self-efficacy, that they can have an active influence on their life. So life story work shows that you can have an influence on what is happening, no matter how small. Like I took my teddy from house to house because that comforts me at night, and teddy becomes part of my life history. The third key reason for me is that they need to find a meaning in life. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if they understand their life history, then at the end of the story, they can say, I prefer to live with my parents, but since I'm now here, I do feel protected, and it is a stable and loving place, and I accept that. And I think through life story work, we help children to move on in life. Mm-hmm. So But Catherine, I'm sure you can add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Bep. That was helpful. Yes, Catherine, is there anything you'd like to expand on that, please?
Basically, I see life story work as a way of helping children integrate their past into their present. It's a way for them to help understand their experiences and their history, because worldwide, children come into care for various reasons, but often there's a real lack of understanding of why that is. I see it as a real way to help them develop their identity, which is often very much lacking for our children in care. It creates a sense of connection and belonging, because we all know the core needs of children is safety, belonging, and connectedness. And when life story work doesn't happen, I think sometimes that's missing for our kids. And it's very difficult for them to settle wherever that may be, whether it's returning back to birth family, staying with foster family, kin family, or moving on to adoption. If they don't have that sense of who am I, how did I get here, then how do they know where I'm going? So that's what I see life story work is. It really helps them deal with that sense of loss and, as I said, lack of connectiveness that happens when you end up in the care system. And for me, identity is about children understanding who did they see themselves as, how did they think other people perceive them. And I don't see life story work as one sort of avenue to arrive there. I see it as all the significant and important adults in a child's life being able to help them change any negative self-talk, help increasing self-esteem, helping them realize that they have self-worth and they're valued. And so there's bits and pieces that every adult that touches a child's life along the way can do. And that's why this webinar was really exciting, because even during COVID, there are significant nurturing adults within children's lives that can do pieces of this work with them still.
Excellent, Catherine. Thank you very much for that. Leading into some of the questions that we have. And I suppose before we get to there, I would also like to think about, you've talked about belonging, and I'm just interested in any theoretical approaches that have been underpinning the work you have undertaken on life story work.
Is that for me or Bep?
Catherine, sorry, Catherine. I'll start with you and then I'll move back to Bep.
Sorry, okay. I mean, obviously, Erik Erikson, a developmental psychologist, and his work on having to move through stages successfully to integrate into the next stage is important, especially around identity versus identity confusion. And this is where a lot of our children struggle that are in care. Also, narrative psychology and storytelling, and the value of children being able to retell their story and make sense of life events really, for me, is the core foundation of life story work. And telling your story as a child, to me, doesn't always mean verbally. It could be through art. It could be through whatever vehicle that is comfortable for a child to work through their life story is what's important, but it's the story in itself and the telling and the integrating of that into who they are that is important. A model that we used when I was working with children moving on to adoption was called the 3-5-7 model by Darla Henry. And it's a real strength-based approach that is very doable for any adult in a child's life. If they understand, it's easy things like lost lines, you know, taking photos of important places children have been and see what memories they have attached to them, what people are attached to them. So it's, again, helping children walk through their life story from their perception, and then helping them understand maybe facts that aren't quite accurate, because sometimes children have memories that are a little bit skewed or lost or seen from their perception, which is fair. So it's that ability to help them walk through using this model of, as Bep said, understanding who am I, what happened to me, where am I going, and how will I know when I get there? And the activities, there's an actual workbook that I found so helpful in working with children, because it could be of all ages, and it's often playing games with them or doing something very tangible as opposed to talking, that help bring in that story. So I would say there's some theoretical underpinnings to the work I do, but I always said it's led by the child, and it has to start where they are and what they're comfortable in terms of working with you in whatever format that is.
Thank you, Catherine. And Bep, I could see you nodding. around some of the ethical approaches that Catherine was referring to. Same question to yourself. I don't know if there's anything there that you would want to expand on.
Yeah. I mean, Erickson, Winnicott, that's all those people that have said, you know, you can only live on and continue to exist if you understand what happened before with you. I have developed together with some psychologists the methodology and the tools, My Backpack. And that is a set of tools that we developed based on evidence-based psychotherapeutic theories that we transformed into work, what social workers and foster carers can do with children. And that's mainly what Catherine also says, creative materials like drawings, playing with hand puppets, because it's often easier to talk about somebody else's story than about your own story. For children, that's sometimes very hard. So through storytelling, to using hand puppets, and I just show you one of our famous hand puppets. And you know, it's easier to tell the story of Duck that goes to live with the dogs than to talk about I, me, myself, especially for smaller children, younger children. And I think that is very important. And when we train people, then we always use mentalization-based treatment for children. And that is really to make the connection between emotions and events. Because life story work very often becomes, we have to map out all the events in the child's life, but we also have to learn the child to connect emotions to events, because often foster children behave because, you know, they act out because there was a trigger that reminds them to the past and that they didn't understand. And then, you know, they have to learn or to be helped to link emotions to events. So to express, I was angry because of that. And, you know, then and life story work helps a lot. Doing that to connect, not only map out, okay, this is your father, this is your mother, but also how do you feel? And how do those people feel? So also make the connection, not only from their own feelings, but also starting to understand that other people in their life story also had feelings. So that might also help them to accept that their parents could not care for them, or although they probably wanted, but also try to accept why they are dumped alongside the road, which happens in some of the countries like India. And, you know, those children don't know, they cannot talk with their birth parents. They simply don't know who they are. So I think that is very important. And I think life story work needs to make a beautiful scar out of a scar and discover where are the protective factors in yourself that can help you through a difficult period, because that can also help them in the future. I hope I'm clear.
Thank you, Bep. And actually it leads wonderfully into one of the next questions, was around the bit around, so why do life story work? Why is it beneficial? And I think you've just pulled that, you've woven that together there beautifully about how that is there for the children and about how we do this in a child-focused way so that they can make some sense, they can make some connections, they can have some understanding, and also helps the adults around them to be able to be supporting them as well. Is there anything you would want to add to that, Bep, before I ask the same question of Catherine?
Well, I think that it's one thing that, you know, a child gets the opportunity to talk, but I think you also help through life story work other people to talk. So when we did, I will give an example, we did this, you know, making a duck story of 5 children of one family. So each child told a story of a duck that was removed from the duck family and went to live with the dogs, and what happened from the moment they were removed. And they disclosed things they never had disclosed, because they couldn't talk about the sexual abuse for themselves, but they could talk about the abuse of the duck. And then at the end of the story, the mother of these 5 kids that were all in different foster families was asked to tell her story of the duck mother. And, all these pieces came together. And I think that is so important in life story work, that you involve, if they are available for that, the parents, the grandparents, to also tell their story. Mm-hmm. And that really helps children also to read, how they felt about the things that happened.
Thank you, Bep. I love that's really helpful as an example. Thank you, Catherine. So same question to yourself, really, then, about why do life story work? Why is it beneficial?
And I think I would echo everything that Bep says, and I think she's done a beautiful job of sort of why do we do life story work and the benefits. And it really is about the child, but it's also about giving a voice to the people around the child, because often, especially foster carers, because that is predominantly where my work has been, they often don't know how to approach that with a child. They're a little bit scary, a little bit worried. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? So this gives them some tools to have those conversations. But it also helps them as they're working with a child through the life story work and with workers to give them a better integration understanding of the child that's in their care. One thing that, I had really found over the years is that trauma plays a huge impact for our children. And as we know, trauma sort of changes how the brain functions, and often it impacts memories. And so it's sort of helping children sort through those memories of what is sort of magical thinking and what is factual. And it's also helpful for the people caring for them to be able to sort through that as well, alongside them. One thing that, you talked about making, I think, books, Bep, and we call them life books here in Canada. And in Ontario, where I work right now, it's actually an expectation that every child in care has a life book. And there's a reason, because it's tangible. Memory boxes and life books hold key facts of a child's life. And it helps them then understand, who am I? Where was I born? Who are my parents? Who are my siblings? Where am I from? Where are my parents from? My grandparents from? Where have I lived? Maybe schools that I've attended. All those pieces that sometimes get lost. So sequentially, they can start putting their life in order, where before sometimes it's a jumble of memories. So I think memories really matter when you're looking at identity formation for children, because until those are accurate for children and been sort of they've had the ability to share those memories, as Bep said, sometimes disclosures come out in life story work. So that is also a challenge and a benefit of life story work, that you have to be prepared. As Bep said, there's going to be a lot of feelings come up associated with the work, and along with those feelings comes behaviors. So that is good, though, that children find a way to express themselves. And they find a way to associate their feelings to their experiences. So I would see that as a huge benefit, because until all of that is addressed, often what people see that are caring for children is simply the behaviors, and they don't understand the underlying need and cause of those behaviors. So unfortunately, the work doesn't get done because too much focus is on addressing behavior as opposed to helping a child work through their life story.
Thank you, Catherine, and to some extent reaching into the next question, which is, okay, there are benefits, but what are the challenges? Mm-hmm. And you both actually have referred there to disclosures that can be made, and also about how at times, and I'm just going to say as a sector, therefore can take a step back from undertaking that life story work, whether it's anxiety about what might happen, whether it's about anxiety about re-triggering things for children, and I'm focusing specifically on children at the moment. How do you address those challenges? If when you're doing that, either, sorry, Catherine, still with yourself just now, when you've been talking about doing that and some of the training with foster carers, how do you address some of those challenges so that people still feel confident to face those challenges?
Working with CARES currently that I train and assess, we also provide ongoing training, not just on life books, but on therapeutic crisis interventions. So a way to help children when they're going in crisis, which often can happen through life story work. How do you support them around that? We also do some training around person brain, which helps them understand children and often the way that they think and feel because of their past experiences. So by providing that for our carers, it gives them some understanding of when children are triggered, how can they support them through that? Because often then they're at a loss, and then that fear comes up and that apprehension. But doing the work myself, when I was working with children, you also have to recognize when it's outside of your scope of expertise. So when you start working with children, if I could clearly see there was a lot of work that needed to do maybe around attachment, around loss, there's experts in the field that can do that work with these children, and you need to know when to say, this is an area that somebody else then needs to take that work and support the child, because we can't be an expert in every field. And it's important that when that comes up, that we help children and support children the best we can to work through that. I think the biggest challenge, honestly, for me will be helping adults to understand that life story work is a process, and that each child is unique and they're going to go at their own pace. And so we need to make sure as the adult that we're not setting our own agenda, because working in the child protection, child welfare system, often the worker especially, there's these tight deadlines and timelines of you have to do this by this amount of time, and children don't work on our schedule, they work on their own. And you might get 5 minutes to work out of a child, or you might get a half an hour, and you have to be okay with that as an adult. And you need to be willing to shift and move as children shift and move their feelings. And the other key to that challenge is you need to recognize you have to support the other adults that are doing this work with a child, because it's exhausting emotionally, not only for the child, but the adult involved in it. And they need somewhere to debrief and process, because it can bring up some pretty heavy feelings and memories from children, and they need a space to be able to back and debrief with their supervisor or somebody else to say, how do I best support this child through this, or the care, turn to the worker and say, I'm not sure what to do here, what to say. So I think that is probably the challenge of the work. It's keeping a child focused and supporting that team around the child to feel like they're able to do the work with the child, and when they're not, then to be able to recognize that.
Thank you, Catherine. And again, yeah, interesting some of the next questions about keeping things child focused. But Bep, could I come back to yourself and just ask you also to expand on any of the challenges that you have experienced, or that you would consult about around life story work?
Yeah, well, I think one of the key things that we always hear from social workers that is time. They don't have time. Their supervisors often don't see the value of them sitting not half an hour with the child, but more often. I know in the Netherlands, social workers sometimes tell us that they have an obligation to speak twice a year alone with a child. So that is in their time frame and in their caseload. So, but the moment you start with, like Catherine says, with life story work, that might take much longer, because the child comes up with a question and you have to find out what has happened. So children come up with the most concerns that we didn't know they were concerned about, like my father is in prison. Now I've become a teenager and I'm sometimes very troublesome. Will I also end up as a criminal? Well, then you have to work. So in this particular case, the social worker took the child to the prison, but before talked with the father to explain to this boy that it was not because, he is the son of his father, he needs to end there, but that his father was quite stupid, that he did this and this and this. But that's all time consuming. And, you know, very often social workers go from case to case, so they don't have that time. And you cannot leave all that to the foster carers to do.
No.
So it must be a combination of foster carers and social workers to do this process. So the moment you start with it, you need to put in time to really follow, like you say, the pace of the child. Because in life story work, it's really key that children lead. And it's not you that says, okay, but you know, in our goals for this half year stands that at the end we need to have it completed. Children may have to say, now stop. And another challenge, and that is in particular in countries where I work, because, you know, in our countries, often everything is quite documented. But if you come in countries where there's no documentation and a child is just found on the garbage pile or whatever, there are no baby pictures. Children are just put in a children's home. Maybe visitors took pictures, but the staff didn't take pictures, and in any case didn't preserve them. So the moment children end up in a family, there is no material, there is no history. So you have to be prepared to help the child accept that there is no history. You know, so you have to come up with the memories of this child, or you go back. So that's quite a challenge. I know that in Kenya, for instance, care leavers, a group of care leavers that didn't have any picture of themselves as a child, went into children's homes and made books with children. That was beautiful, because they were exactly the key people that could do this work with the children, because they could explain, you know, I'm now here, I'm okay, but for you, we are going to make this picture book of things that are important for you.
Thank you, Bep. That's really, I've got that very emotion around other young people, as always. You know, young people then actually being the ones that can say, this is what should have happened, this is what we would want to happen, and then actually leading the way forward about how things should happen for other children. And to some extent, again, my next question was going to be about when there are so many people who can be involved in life story work, is how you ensure that that remains child focused. I think you've really already explored some of that there, Bep. First of all, about being able to say, well, it's got to be at the child's pace. It may be that actually the answer is that we have to stop now. So it's led by the child. It's not necessarily led by organisational timescales that need to be met. Just before I pass that question to Catherine to see if there's anything, is there anything you wanted to expand on from what you were saying around remaining child focused?
Yeah, well, what I always find interesting when we do training about working with the tools of my backpack, which are meant to talk with children, that social workers find it the hardest not to speak, to be silent, to ask questions and let the children speak. Because as social workers and foster parents, we are so eager to tell the child. But, you know, the moment you let children speak, and again, I want to give an example of a little boy that said, yeah, at my house they threw with glass. Well, then immediately as a social worker, you would say, aha, what happened or whatever. But this social worker really did a good job, and she went back to the father of the child. And this boy was removed when he was 3. After a big fight and violence in the family, he was removed by the police because the father had pushed the mother against the wall, and there was a frame with glass, you know, a painting or a picture frame that fell over this little boy. He still, I mean, he was not even 3, so he couldn't tell that story, but that was his memory. If you don't really listen to what the child is saying, just walks over it, you know, you miss that point, which was so important, because that declared the fear of this child for frames in his room.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it's really listening, not talking.
Yes.
And that's an art.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and Bep, I have to say, both panel members are foster carers, and I've been a foster carer, so I'm coming from a place of, we've all been there, because we get so used to advocating on behalf of children and young people, really making sure that we're also doing that listening skill and holding on to that listening skill can sometimes, well, I would say personally, can at times is a challenge, because we are so busy making sure that we're trying to advocate, and actually being able to make sure that we're also equally doing that listening is vital, as well as expecting it of anyone else who is supporting and working around the child and the family. Catherine, was there anything in terms of, you know, sort of key messages about keeping it child focused that you would like to share?
I think I would just echo what Bep said, that it's really hard to just actively listen to children and then try to hear what they're really telling you through their stories and their memories. And it's being willing to sit in silence. I can remember working with a young man, and he was 12 at the time, but came into care when he was quite young, and literally had the floor. We had huge pieces of paper, and in his drawing, he was doing a lifeline. And he was trying to place through his life everybody that was important to him. And he would come to certain people in certain times, and he didn't want to talk about it. So I just let him go at his pace rather than keep asking questions, which we love to do as social workers. But then he eventually looped himself back to those places and those people and those times. And so sitting in silence, and as Bep said, I think she said it beautifully, we can't put our own adult interpretation on children's perceptions, because their lenses are different and their perceptions are theirs. And I think we learn more about children when we don't do that. And I've had similar instances with children, you know, that talk about how there was glass around their bed, and you think, what are they talking about? You know, they can remember there was glass around their bed. And so you listen and you have those conversations more than once. And what came to pass is the way there was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of partying going on in this home of siblings since they were really little. And the way the dad would ensure they didn't get out of bed at night is he put broken glass around their bed. And I mean, who would ever have thought that there was any validity to the broken glass story on the floor, just like yours, Bep? So we need to really be careful we don't try to reinterpret children's memories. And again, I'm just going to go back. It's really about allowing the child to set the pace. And it is difficult. I worked in child welfare for a lot of years, and you have the time pressures and the priority pressures, but children always have to be the priority. It's more important to do the work than to get the recording done, in the sense of sometimes you got to let your paperwork go to do the work with the child. And at the end of the day, the time that you put in to working with that child and listening to them and supporting them and taking them to where they need to go, like to the prison to visit their parent, to go and have those conversations many times with birth parents, you know, and children, to do those conversations, because they can't integrate their memories and knowledge of what they know until they hear it from the person that was involved, because it's just us speaking otherwise. And so I'll just emphasize what Bep has said so nicely.
Thank you, ladies. I would also just like to pause for a second here, just to remind everybody who's joined us today that if there are any questions that are arising from you as we've been going through some of the questions that we've put so far, then please feel free to put those in the chat. And when we come to the end of the questions that had been submitted, then we will try and make sure that we loop these back in again, because I know even just in what I've been hearing so far, I'm sitting with questions sitting in the back of my head going, oh, I wondered about how does that work? So I'm sure there will be other people who will have some questions. So please do use the chat function, and we will come back and try and make sure we capture those as well as we can. I wondered also, this is a slightly, just is a question that's come up as you've been talking. I'm aware that when we are thinking about life story work, it's something that we see a lot of work and the emphasis that I have seen that goes into thinking about this from birth or pre-birth. Actually, when we think about, there might be families where the child is the likely to be being removed at birth. And we see a lot of work that happens around life story work to try and make sure that there is a record in whatever guise, whether it be a book, whether it be recordings, whether it be photo albums, all of those different tools that sit around life story work. But it's also about how to maintain that momentum as children are beyond birth and moving into 2 years and 3 years and 5 years and 9 years and 15 years. And I wondered if I could start with yourself, Bep, and just ask if that's something that you've come across where there might be countries or organisations or cultures where we start off with great enthusiasm, and about how do we keep that momentum going. And if you've got any examples, that would be fantastic to be able to share. So, Bep, could I put that question to you first of all?
Yeah, let me rephrase the question so that I answer what you say. You say you do this life story work, very enthusiastic, then you have the book or the box or whatever, and then it's gone.
Yeah, how do we ensure that that whole momentum for that child is kept going for life and not necessarily just at the start of life or at phases of their life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it also depends on the children, I think. It's you continue to add. For some children, I remember last week we did a webinar for Malta, and then one foster parent said, you know, my foster child simply doesn't want to look at that box with pictures anymore. You know, I want to make this, but he is 15 and he has something like, hang on, not interesting. And I think then the art is that you say, but I'm interested. Or can we put it in order? So in sort of an order from, oh yes, and that happened and that happened. So I think it's sometimes from outside that you have to engage the children in that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's also for children done. With my backpack, you know, that we do this process, and that's not really a fact-finding thing, but it's more helping children to connect emotions to facts and to understand why they are placed out of home and what the feelings are connected to that. Some children have done the process, they put it in the backpack, and it's gone. For other children, that little duck continues to live for them. It's in their bed, every evening the story is told. I think it depends very much on children, like it does with your own teenagers, that are saying it's no use. And then when they are 30, at least that's happening to me, then they come back and say, do you still have that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Catherine, same question to yourself. Just wondering if you had any opinions or views on that.
Okay. I can only speak for the work that I've done in Canada because I haven't done any work in other countries, but I think in Ontario, at least, the expectation that every child that's in care, even when they move from home to home, that life book goes with them. So that it is a journey through their care, whether they choose to take it out and look at it, or whether they choose to work on it is absolutely their choice. But the expectation for the care is that they continue to add to it, because we do know that sometimes what happens is children are not ready to do the work, or teenagers are like, I'm done with that. I'm not wanting to work on that right now. But they'll become 20 or 30-year-olds to say, oh, what happened in that period of my life? So I think it's twofold. What I would say that carers can continue to add to a child's book, even if they're not wanting to, simply by ensuring that they're recording important times and spaces and people for children, but which is different than the actual life story work, which is done with the child, and that needs to be at their pace and their desires. So to me, it's two different things, but we always need to be the memory keepers, is what I tell the people that I work with, the staff and the carers. We are children's memory keepers, because if we are not, nobody else will be. So to the best of our ability, we need to continue that process until they leave our care, age out of foster care, return home, whatever the case may be.
So Catherine, I think what I'm hearing there is a national policy position, is that right? About
it's best practice. I mean, you can't make it mandatory. It's not work that you can say you have to do this, but it's best practice. We try to help foster carers in this instance understand best practice is to ensure these books are done for children in whatever format they look like. And little people often really love coloring and sprinkles and stickers, and it's not about the product, it's about the process. So I would call it best practice, not a policy.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And just, I suppose also what stems from that as well is life story work is often, we could be say, rooted in relationship-based practice. You know, it's got to be in a space, place that feels right for the child, and that will often then be dependent on a relationship with a social worker, for example. And we all know that there will be turnover of social workers in children's lives. And so I have a question, I suppose there's something in there as well. I have an interest from an organisational perspective about how organisations ensure that there is a culture within their organisation to ensure that if it's not an individual that is there, that actually that practice, that best practice continues. I wondered if either of you, if I start with yourself, Bep, do you have any thoughts on organisations and approaches to ensuring that life story work is implemented as part of their ethos when looking after foster carers and children?
Yeah, well, I think it's so essential, this whole work. So yes, it should be mandatory. Like Catherine says, every child should have some form of life story work done with them. But yeah, it's very different. The approach is very different. I come in many countries where, you know, the voice of the children is not even heard. You know, children should be seen, not heard, etc. And yeah, where children are also so easily moved without having this done. So I think based on international conventions, good practices, we have to continue to spread the importance of this for the identity of the child.
Thank you, Bep.
Is that an answer to your question, or?
Yeah, absolutely, it's helpful because it is about where that responsibility sits, and as you say, some of that will be in conventions, some like rights of the child, some will be in best practice approaches, some will be through regulation. So I'm interested in that. Catherine, is there anything from your perspective that you would add that an organisational culture and approach to life story work?
Well, I know at Key Assets Ontario and Canada that the minute a child enters care, our foster support worker goes out and meets with the government worker that's placing the child, and with them they do what's called a memory box. And in that memory box is a disposable camera, a teddy, a doll, or something else tangible if they're an older child, to begin the best practice of ensuring that children's memories are maintained and kept. And again, we sort of our expectation of our carers, and with the support of workers, because it all doesn't fall on carers, the support of the social workers, to make life books if they don't already have one, or to continue to add to them. And that is actually part of our core philosophy, that this is work that should be done and will be done with each child that comes in our care. And when they leave our care, they will take some form of their, life story work with them that has been completed while in care of Key Assets. I can also say that, when I actually fostered Prince Edward Island is probably not a place that a lot of people would know in Canada. It's a very small province. That's where I fostered. But I think the agency there did a great job of saying to carers that they at least can be the memory keepers, that they can have those cameras available, they can have those photo albums available, they can allow the children in the care to have pictures of the home and where they lived and the people in it and the pets. At least it's a piece. I can't speak for other countries and other agencies, but I think agencies can sort of put that in as best practice. but then they need to be able to allow the time for workers to support the carers and the children to do that work, which then becomes sometimes the dilemma that we've talked about.
Thank you very much, ladies. This is really helpful, really interesting. I'm just going to pause for a second so that I can see if there was anything that we would particularly need to come back to in the chat for the questions, so that we can confirm what might need to be.
There was one question from Chiaki in Japan. She says, my friend is an abandoned child. She doesn't know the birth parents and there is no record. Adoptive parents are not very good parents for her and they are not supportive of her. I don't think there are any social workers or groups in Japan who can do life story work together. She has to do the work on herself. How can she do life story work?
Let's start with Bep. Have you got any initial thoughts? Have you done any work in Japan?
No,
Bep?
I've never been in Japan, so I don't know the situation there, but I know the situation of many children that were foundlings of who the birth parents are not known. So, you know, then life story work can be quite something, because you have to start talking about, okay, there are no known parents and they are also nowhere to be found. We cannot trace them. And that's really, for a lot of people, an identity issue. I mean, we see the problem, it's out of this scope, but at the moment with all these new forms of making babies with adopted eggs and surrogacy, etc., then you also see the importance of knowing who am I? Where do I come from? And I think, for people, the only thing you can do is, if it's children, but this probably is already an older person, but is make a story together with these children. And that's what, for instance, we do with this little duck, that you make a story of a duck, the duck that goes to live with the dogs, and then you say, what is your story? You know, now we made up a story about, and you can do it, with a puppet, or you can do it whatever, but what story looks like your story? And there are also books about that. And then, mourn together about the fact that you don't know anything. I think children have to be able to mourn about what is not known and to just be sad about that, but then say it is as it is. You know, the situation is as it is. So what helps you to get you through this? Maybe by visualizing how your mother would have looked like. But this is also a story, if I hear from Japan, of adoptive parents that are not really wanting to discuss that. That's also what you sometimes see. Foster carers that would like that they got a child without a history. So foster carers that are not open for the history of the child. That mother is this, that mother is that. So that's, if we talk about challenges, that's a challenge here. But I think it's very important to not just put it away and say, okay, we don't know anything, so this is as it is, but really, live this through. Also the losses in life. I'm sorry I cannot live with your parents, but it is not different. It's the same with having a disability or a disease. You can be sad about that, but it is as it is.
Thank you,
But
Bep.
you need help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And don't wash it away like, oh, it's not important. You're now the nicest person in the world. And oh, yes, you know, it's what foster parents do. But you're born in my heart and I chose you, and not all children are chosen. That's at that moment not important.
Yeah, like it sounds like acceptance, a level of acceptance rather than
Yes,
ideal.
life story work also helps children to understand, and through understanding and be sad together about things that you would want to have it different, but it is not different, get to acceptance, and then you can move on.
Yeah,
But
really
if you wash it
accept.
away and just put it under the ground, that affects your life and becomes a trauma, and then you need therapy.
But thank you. Catherine, you've been nodding along with some of that. Is there anything that you would want to add or expand on?
No, that would be out of my area of expertise, and I agree fully with everything that Bep said, and I think she said it beautifully. So again, it's about it can create trauma in people if they don't acknowledge and accept that that is just a piece of their history they cannot have because it does not exist. So Bep, thank you, because you worded that so lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you say, one of those very real challenges for a lot of children and for a lot of adults now in terms of what some of those gaps are, and being able to mourn the loss of that history, as well as us talking about how we do try and support that life journey for people. And I do have some more questions here, but was there anything else in the chat, Jean-Anne, that we needed to pick up on?
There's one comment and one question. So one comment was actually from me. My parents were foster parents. So I was a young person whose parents were foster parents. And every time that we had a person or a child come in to live in our house, we used to give them a little book. So sometimes it was a copybook and we would stick photos in it. So we used to have a photo of everyone who was living in the house at that moment, because sometimes there would be different foster children. So we would take a current photograph, and then we would have individual photographs with their name and age, so that when you're coming in, it can be quite overwhelming to catch the names and the age of people. And then a photograph of all the pets as well, all the animals, so that they would know what the names of the animals were. And some of the children would put those in their memory books. And I thought that was a good idea, because they might forget later on, or they might not, like they might have photos of themselves at those age, but they might not always have photos of their foster siblings along the way. And certainly I've found over the years that, especially now in the age of social media, over the years, some of the young people that would have, well, they're now young people, but some of the foster children that would have lived with my family, and they would have been younger than me, as they turn 18, they find me on Facebook and they message me and they say, hey, do you remember me? I lived in your house from this age to this age. And we would give them more photos. So I thought that was a nice thing as well, that some foster families do. And then there was one question as well. Another one just came in. So there was one question that was already sent back through registration as well, but it's been repeated here. How about extending life story work to bio parents directly? How would you go about that to help assist their growth and integration? And again, back to, and do you have any tips around supporting life story work during COVID, since we have to reduce face-to-face? There's been a lot of virtual visits. How do you share practice during this strange time?
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's again beautifully, because it links in with the next question was around COVID. So let's pick up on that one just now. So yes, so we said that this was in the time of COVID. How do you practically undertake life story work was one part of that question. And then part B, if you like, or an extension of that, is how do we frame this pandemic as part of young people's histories? Because we know that we are all in this at the same time, and people will frame it in different ways. So could we start maybe with some of the practical bits, the conversation around that was in the chat there as well about some of the restrictions. Have either of you been involved in virtual life story work or coaching around life story work? Catherine, well, let's start with yourself, and if you haven't, just if you've any suggestions.
Okay. My work would be minimal because I don't work directly with the children, but I work with the families. But again, it's around just continuing to support families. And we're still doing pre-service training for people that are interested in fostering. And a key part of what I do with them is helping them understand the importance of doing this work with children. So that would be the level of work that I do. But I don't think it needs to end. But what needs to be built around at this point, and in my case, would be the carers would be doing the work, continuing with the children, because just because children can't leave the home doesn't mean that they still don't want to talk and they don't want to be heard and they don't want their feelings validated. So I see our job as the adults around the carers to continue to support them virtually by phone. We do have workers that actually still go to the homes when needed to support the children and the carers, because I think COVID particularly has triggered a sense of lack of connectedness and that whole sense of loss for many of our children. Because I don't know about other countries, but I know in Canada, especially in Ontario for a while, any children that were having face-to-face visits with their birth parents, that was put on hold. Mm-hmm. And that for many of our children was huge. So the fallout of that and those feelings fell onto the carers. And so I'm going to go back to saying the life story work is going to continue because all those feelings have been triggered. So it can still happen, but we need to be aware that it's happening within the home in an unstructured setting. And we need to support the people in the moment, whether it's in group care, because I know that was one of the questions. Can children live in residential care, do this work as well? Those same questions are coming up. Why can't I see my parents? Why can't I go with my friends? So there's lots of great resources on COVID and talking to children about COVID. But I think the added layer for children that are not living with their birth family is having those triggers that happen for them. And then supporting them. And virtually, we've just learned to work virtually. And when needed, because we're a frontline service, we're able to go into the homes when needed. I know some of our child youth workers are going directly to support children. Don't know if that answers your question, but to me, life story work, again, I'm going to go back, is about the child and being child focused and actively listening. And when they're expressing those feelings and those concerns and those worries, that's where you need to dig in and keep doing the work.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes. Yes, how do we frame some of this, contact or family time, whatever it's called, in different countries has come to a stop? How do we help children to understand some of that as part of their histories and life story work? Bep, have you had any thoughts or any ideas or conversations as part of your role around the impact COVID-19 might be having on life story work for children?
Yeah, well, it's different. I think if you really, want to start the real life story work, we already said, it can be for children quite something, and it can bring back all kinds of memories, etc. So, I think what I hear from foster parents and what I see in a forum that is existing here in the Netherlands, where foster parents exchange their experiences. Some say, well, the children came to a calm down because they were not forced to visits with their parents that were sort of stressful. So they had time to talk with children, and they sit down, and because there was no school, only online school, but the parents had time to do this, then they could do some of this work. Other children were so angry, and if children are in a stressful situation, you also don't do life story work because you only add stressors to the already existing stressors. Then you simply try to survive in COVID. But what I've seen in Latin America, where I work with an organization that has a lot of residential care, was that they did all kinds of sessions with creative activities around COVID. What does it do with me, and how do I cope with the stress that's put on me, the fact that I cannot go out, I cannot do A, B, C, D. So it can also be an opportunity.
Thank you. Catherine, you touched on the question around whether life story work can be used with children who are still living in residential services. And the question also then was, what do you recommend, what would you recommend happens? Is there anything you'd like to expand on? Because you said there, yes, it can happen within residential. Anything that you think would be utilised differently with staff compared to foster carers, for example?
Well, I'm thinking back to my time working at young offenders, and these are young people who are there for a short period of time that are going to return back into the community or back home to birth parents. But there's all these feelings associated to that happening. So I think we would definitely want to draw on the experience of somebody well-versed in doing life story work to support whoever that child's, I'm going to call them their primary worker within that setting, because we know often within residential settings, workers keep changing, right? They're on shifts. So you'd want to have whoever that worker is that's most significantly attached to that child doing some of that work, but it would need to be supported by somebody that's well-versed in it, because otherwise it becomes, I worry, a little bit piecemeal about throwing activities at children, but not processing the feelings that are behind those activities, if that makes sense. So I believe that it should happen for those children, because otherwise what happens is they return home or they move out into the community without any of those feelings dealt with, and without that work having been done. And then unfortunately they're not in a good space to continue on with their life, because they've not sort of integrated their past experiences into how they may function in the present. I think a big piece of that work, and we talked about bio parents, for me, they're often the key. Now, and Bep, you may disagree with this, and this is only my personal experience, that I always did some work with the birth parents before I put birth parents and child in a room together, because I need to have a sense of where the parent was at and what they may say. I didn't want it to be a surprise, because unfortunately our children have experienced enough trauma and loss. So I always wanted to have a sense of where a parent was and what messaging they were going to be able to give to a child in terms of their history and their experiences while living at home, before I put the child in the situation with that. But I've done some great work with birth parents to help integrate some of that history. But the interesting thing was, by involving the parent and gathering some of that information and helping understand a child's life story, it also is very therapeutic for the parents. Because what I found in the work that I do is that it's very systemic in nature. You have to start talking to birth parents and you realize they may have been in care of themselves, or they didn't have ideal life situations, and they start working through their life story. And by working through their life story, they're then able to have some insight into why this is important for their child.
Thank you. And I think that's really helpful, because it was also a question that had been submitted, had been about biological parents, which was kind of coming on to, and about, and also the siblings of children who are in family foster care, and how life story work may well be able to support the parents to make some sense of their own histories, and therefore to be able to understand the importance of the histories for their child or for their children, and where children are living separately. Is there anything that you would like to expand on that? Because I know that's been part of sort of woven through some of what's been said so far. But in terms of working with biological parents and extended members of the family, is that something that you see happening? Is there examples that you might be able to refer to?
Well, I think if they are there, that's really important. Because like Catherine says, for them, it can also be a way of starting to collect things. I remember one of my foster children, we sang a special prayer every evening before they went to sleep. And my foster children, I didn't want to impose my Christianity on them. So I said, okay, we can sing another lullaby. And they said, no, I want this one. And she went home and she explained to the mother, this is what we sing. And she said, oh, but that was my grandmother singing all the time. And then they started to talk about that. And yeah, I think it's so important to also get that conversation, that the parents start to talk about their parents and how their life was before. So yes, I think it's very important. But I think one thing about the siblings siblings can contribute to the life story work of that child, but it's an individual thing. So each child should have their own, they can have this family book, like Tina Ann said, but it's the family book for that particular child. And if you have 2 children, they each get their book. And that's, I think, what your parents did and your family did. So, because for every child, different things are important. It's just, also in normal families, it's like that. If I found a skirt of my daughter yesterday, I gave it to my granddaughter, her daughter, and she's now wearing it. And my daughter immediately started to tell a story about when she was wearing that skirt. Well, that is what happens also with life story work. The child. So yes, this is important. And I would want for the people that are coming from countries where you still have a lot of residential care, because I think the question came from there, can you do it there? One of my experiences in Namibia was that we started life story work in a children's home, and I was surprised that it was so important for the identity of the individual child, because those children were only perceived as groups. It was that group. And suddenly each child got their own book, and you started to work with them on their own book. And all kinds of stories came up. Very interesting. They had a picture of themselves taken as the front page of the book, and they said, we are only in group pictures. We don't have an individual picture of ourselves. So that helps to prepare children for reintegration, for instance. But it's very important that it's an individual thing.
Thank you, Bep. One of the questions that we had that as well was around how often would you bring out the life story book to look over with a child? I think that it feels like that's kind of been addressed through, it's led by the child, it's about being able to look at the time and the space that they're in, but making sure that it does happen in a way that feels appropriate with them. But one of the other layers that has come through in the questions is about how you can add culture to life story work. And I'm presuming that question might be about where children who perhaps from a different ethnicity are in a foster care placement with a family, and about how you can add in culture. I'm not sure if somebody could perhaps put in the chat if that's not the lens that question was being asked through. But if we are thinking about culture and about how we can add that to the life story work, is that something that you have got any opinions or examples on? And I'll start with Catherine, please.
I can only speak a little bit from personal experience and a little bit from my work with some of the children. Where I worked in Guelph, it is not a very diverse community, even though it was a big city. So when I had children that came from a different ethnic background than I was familiar with, it was very important for me to ask parents, extended family, or mentors within the community what was important to that child, to that family, and that community, because I could never make assumptions that I knew. One of the young ladies that I cared for, her dad his background was, he's Caucasian, he was Jehovah's Witness. Her mom was Indigenous, and her many extended family lived on a reserve. And she was not allowed to explore that part of our identity. It was forbidden by the father. So the very important work that had to happen with this young lady was me actually taking her to where her extended family lived and allowing her to talk to them. She became involved in drumming. And although it's very tangible things, that was part of her life story work that I couldn't do because I couldn't add that cultural piece, they could. But it's finding the safe adults that are able to do that work or help you support that work. And I've always said it's really important that we don't impose, and I heard Bep say this, our own worldviews on children, that we need to understand what their worldview is. And culture is more, I see, than ethnicity. It is about family traditions. It's about many other things that we have to really be good at listening. And we have to ask the questions to the right people so that we can understand from a child's perspective what may be important, or that family's perspective.
Catherine, thank you. Bep, is there anything that you would like to add to that question?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Catherine. It's so important to recognize that this cultural inheritance is so important for identity. Mm-hmm. You know, who am I? So, but yeah, you also have, that's the other thing. It's different in different countries. Our countries are very much around words and written things and pictures. I've seen in Africa where that was really beautiful, a foster care organization made with all their prospective foster parents a memory box for themselves. So the foster carers that couldn't read or write, but were the most perfect foster carers in the world, but they made a memory box during their training, and that helped them to make a memory box with their children. So there was no written text in there, but there were all kind of leaves or special seeds or whatever what they put in, and that was a story connected to each piece in that box. Mm-hmm. And that helped them to tell their story, get through their trauma, because a lot of people have suffered losses in South America or South Africa in any case. So many people have lost family members. They could live through their trauma, then they could help their children. There were no words. It was culturally beautifully attached to that community.
Thank you, Bep. I'm just trying to see if I can pick up. There's been a question in the chat. We were talking about some of the challenges earlier on, and one of the challenges being about disclosures that may be made. One of the questions in the chat is about actually if there's something in a child's history that you know about that certainly others. Sorry, let me just read the question. So when a child is known to have been sexually abused at a very young age and doesn't know that part of their history, but the others do, what are your thoughts about when, round about sort of what age, and how this should be explained to them? And that would be on the basis that this wouldn't be the only reason that they were brought into care. Catherine, will I start with yourself? Is that something that you've covered in some of the work that you've been doing?
Well, often, as you say, children come into care for a variety of reasons, and often those memories get really repressed, and they will come out sometimes, I find, as you start doing some of this life story work with them. I don't know if I can say exactly, I don't think you can pinpoint an age. I think it's when it's developmentally appropriate for that child. And what I mean by that is when they're sort of ready and able to do the work, and that maybe has more experience in this than I do. I would work with children based on the time that I was assigned as the worker. And I most of the time, the children would have some sense or knowledge or would have disclosed about previous abuse. So then it's just building on that. I don't have any personal experience of a child not having any memory of that or that knowledge. So I don't know, Bep, if you can speak to that.
Well, I think at the beginning you already said, Catherine, there are moments in doing life story work that you think, okay, this is too complicated. I think that for this you need assistance and an individual per child plan. Okay, how are we going to disclose that kind of events in the child's life? As a foster parent, I have seen too often that children 12 years of age, down here in the Netherlands, they have a right to get their files. Got their files and discovered all kinds of things about their lives. I think that should be a guided process by someone that's really specialized in this.
I agree with you, Bep. Here in Canada, it's 18. I will say that it would be unfortunate if the only way a child discovered their history was through reading about it, that if we know that's coming or that needs to be supported, you're absolutely right. That is a very specialized guided process with somebody that can work them through that process. Yeah.
Thank you both. I'm conscious that there have been a number more messages that have come into the chat, and that Jean-Anne had indicated would probably be about 90 minutes for the webinar, and that is 90 minutes that have gone. What I would propose is if we just, in order to, just a couple of slides just to finish, we can then, because there might be some people that need to leave, then we can stop the recording and maybe just take 10 minutes as a group of people, if anybody wants to stay on, just to pick up on some of the things as a roundtable with anyone, just sort of for 10 minutes, because I can see there's quite a lot of sharing, which is what we're keen to do. For anybody that isn't able to, we will share this still as part of the, be able to send out this out to you, along with some evaluation about how you feel the webinar has gone. But if that feels okay for people, I think what we'll do is we will just bring the questions that we've had that have been submitted already. That's then concluded, so we'll bring those to a close, and then we'll see if there's anything that we need to pick up on. Unless, Jean-Anne, if you've been keeping a track, is there anything that I...
Yeah, so there was just, so the questions that have come in through the chat, we have dealt with so far. There was just one comment from Scotland to say that they have done some virtual contact with foster carers and given resources and shared resources, and that they felt that went really well. There's one request that someone would like to speak. And yeah, other than that, we're on track for the chat feedback at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. In which case then, what we'll do is, the person who wants to speak, let's do that in a minute. Let's finish up with the other slides, please, just so that we are able to then take off that part of the recording. So Jean-Anne, if you wouldn't mind. Just first of all, I would like to thank both Catherine and Bep very much for all your time, for your knowledge, and for being able to answer those questions that were being put to you today. It's really appreciated, and in the spirit of being able to share learning from an international platform, then, as I say, it's really appreciate your support of IFCO for us to be able to share this with members and also other colleagues that have joined us today. We have, just wanted to quickly mention, we talked about COVID-19, we've talked about coronavirus, and we've touched on it, and I think this is probably symptomatic of where we are at in different parts of the country, in the world, sorry, in the country. Well, maybe in some countries we're at different stages as well, to be fair. But I think there really has never been a time, or may never have been a time, when global connectivity has been more important, and especially for sharing best practice and also about providing support. So I just wanted to just say a little bit, to close, about IFCO. We are a membership organisation, so we're always keen for people to join us as a member, but we're passionate about our role in this, and we are introducing some events that have been based on feedback that we have received so far. So I've just put up there, these are all going to be, please follow us on our social media, because we will be announcing these very soon. And I just want to say that we've got a number of thematic webinars. So we're going to have one coming up, which is, we're planning around, at the moment, around education. We have another one which is about out-of-home care standards. So again, we will put this information out to you. Members will see it through the newsletter. Non-members can sign up for a newsletter, or you can follow us, as I say, across our social media. We are also developing roundtable discussion groups. At the moment, we have one which is around social work and professions around foster care, and we have another group which will be developed for foster carers who might want to be able to come together with other foster carers across an international perspective, just to be able to share some of their identity as foster carers. So again, those ones are open to members only, and that will also be where you see our youth participation groups, and will also be for members only, where they have the opportunity to be able to engage with youth participation, which then ultimately shapes what we do, where we go, alongside the voice of those that support them and families around the children. We're developing our virtual online training for the workforce and for foster carers. We have our own consultancy service, which is also about supporting countries and companies. And that's around managing change processes and developing leadership in alternative care systems and child protection. We do have a Dare to Lead 2-day training workshop based on the research of Dr. Brené Brown that's coming up. We don't have dates for those. If you are interested in those or in anything else that I've talked about, please feel free to email us either at IFCO, at ifco.info. Jean-Anne will pick up that email, and my email is vice-president@ifco.info, and we'd love to be able to talk with you further. And if we could just move to the last slide. Look, we've talked about becoming a member of the IFCO family, and you can do that via our website. And as I say, you can follow us on social media. We are the same as everybody else. COVID-19 has hit particularly hard in different ways. For us as a small charity with an international footprint, our conference this year had to be cancelled, which was a disappointment, but I'm glad to say that we've been able to rally around with a range of events that we will be announcing. We are all volunteers, but we are determined to support the sector, and these events that we're providing are free. So we would appreciate your support. We're asking you just to watch out for further announcements. We do have a really interesting fundraising event that is going to be launched next week. So we appreciate your support, even if it's not about fundraising or a donation, but please spread that word amongst your networks. We would very much appreciate it. And if we could just come to the last slide, I'd like to thank everybody for your attendance, and also just bring this back to the purpose of the webinar, which is it's really about how we can support people to ensure that we have the best possible outcomes for children and young people across the world. And I would just like to close this part by saying again, thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for everybody for attending. And just say, look, on behalf of IFCO, please stay safe, stay well. Hope this isn't the last time we are engaging. Please stay connected. Thank you very much. And if we can close the recording now, Jean-Anne, thank you.